Do you want my advice, or do you just want me to listen? Think about that question for a moment, because it's a good one. Do you want my advice, or just want me to listen? How often have you given someone advice thinking you're coaching them and helping them find their direction? How often do they reject your advice and do their own thing? Seriously, why did you waste the time? There are two very different ways of helping people find answers to their problems. And in all honesty, we need both advice and coaching in our lives. I'm Kate Mason, and in this episode of Personalities, Parenting and Partners, let's first look at the word advice and what it means. If you give someone advice, you tell them what you think they should do in a particular situation. However, when delivering either advice or coaching, we need to be very aware of our own perceptions and personality and those of the person we're talking to. We need to understand, do they want your help, and in what form do they want it? Sometimes a good solid piece of advice goes down a treat, but other times coaching is what is needed. My guest today is Tracy Noon. She is an INFJ, sometimes referred to as the advocate or the idealist. People of this personality type often feel misunderstood. Perhaps it's because they're the most rare personality type in the MBTI, making up only 1 to 3% of the US population. Or maybe it's because they're walking contradictions. They're easygoing perfectionists. They're both logical and emotional, creative and analytical. On a personal level, Tracy and I have been great friends from childhood and are semi-related as my brother and her sister are married. Tracy is a very successful businesswoman with over 20 years' experience as a senior executive in international companies. She's known for her expertise in coaching C-suite executives and board directors facing complex challenges. Her career has taken many paths. She was Vice President of Global Solutions at TMP Worldwide in New York, has held executive leadership roles in human capital management in Australia, and more recently was the Chief Corporate Services Officer for New York-based talent management company Hudson's Global. Hi Trey, welcome. It's great to have you with us today.
Thanks, Kate. It's really good to be here.
Now, earlier this week, Tracy and I were discussing how your type doesn't really change, but you can mistake or misunderstand your type when in an environment that requires a different preference. This is something that Trace has recently discovered. So, Trey, what type are you?
Well, Kate, I am an INFJ, so an introverted, intuitive feeler judger. But for most of my whole corporate career, I tested as an INTJ, so a thinker judger.
Right. So we're going to talk about that a bit later and how that affected your working life and your personal life. So being an INFJ, how does this shape what you've done in your life from very early on?
Well, first of all, Kate, the INFJ, as you would know, is the rarest of the personality profiles. So for sure it shaped me because I always have felt a little bit different. And often I think in my life and in my career, it's been easy to misunderstand me because the INFJ is a relatively complex personality profile. On the one hand, probably my defining characteristics as an INFJ are that I am fiercely independent. So even from my earliest childhood, you can't tell me what to do, what to think, what to say, how to feel. I just go my own path. And sometimes that's problematic for me. So, I get in my own way, but that's just the way I am. I can't be any different from that. On the other hand, the other part of my core personality is that I am a deeply feeling and caring person. So those I kind of feel really profoundly. And, right from my earliest life, that has been a hallmark of who I am too. So, for example, I can't bear cruelty of any kind, never have been able to. And even as a child, I couldn't watch those, the old black and white Western movies. I couldn't watch them because the horses would fall over and they'd get hurt, and I couldn't bear watching that. So to this day, I can't detach from things like that. They really affect me. So kind of to summarize it, my defining personality traits are that I am, on the one hand, obstinately independent, and on the other hand, I'm deeply feeling and caring. So it's a bit of a weird combination.
It is, but then your personality type is like that.
Yes.
It's strong on almost all fronts, of preferences. It is a very deep personality. And as a child, I remember going to the movies together, and we saw a really sad movie, you and I, and the animal in it got killed. And you sobbed so much and so hard for so long that it was really, really sad for you.
And embarrassing for you.
And slightly, as a child, you don't really want your friends sobbing like that in a cinema. But I do remember that distinctly about you. And the other thing that's really great for people to know is that as a personality type, if you have a child that is like you, how to understand and deal with that, and perhaps not battle it to the degree that parents might do. Because if it's part of your personality, it's more of an accepting of your child and helping them deal with that in that sense. So it's really interesting to hear those thoughts, though. So can you tell us, in that sense, if you're such an independent personality, what have you done with your life? What risks do you take personally and business-wise?
It's a great question. And I think that to go back to your previous point, you're absolutely right. As a parent, the most important thing for this unusual personality profile of mine to feel is accepted and feel validated for who you are, because there's a lot of misunderstanding that does take place. So in that safe family unit, you need to feel fully accepted. How that's transpired in my life is that, so with this personality type of this really strong kind of intellectual independence, it follows that I haven't, and I think most INFJs don't follow necessarily convention. You don't follow a conventional career or life path just because it's convention, because you're constantly independently thinking about everything that's going on. So in my life, I would say that I have made some unconventional choices in both my career and in my personal life that maybe other people wouldn't understand, but they make total sense to me. I know I was really shaped as a child growing up in country South Australia with you as my friend,
yes,
that we were growing up in a period of time where it was a very conservative, conventional community that we lived in. And at the same time, the women's lib movement was in full force, and I was getting all these messages that suited my personality, which were, you can do, I am woman, hear me roar, you can do whatever you like with your life. Because I was also a really avid reader, and I had these ideas of wanting to be free and travel the world and so on, and I understood that meant, early on, that meant that I had to go to university, have a career, and be financially independent, because with that financial independence, I would have the freedom to live the life that I wanted to live. So that's what I did. I went to uni. You and I think, were the only girls in our school that went to uni.
Yes, we were.
And I studied a business degree with a human resources major, so that HR appealed to that feeling side of my personality. And once I finished that degree, I immediately started to travel the world and build a career at exactly the same time. So fulfilling that childhood fantasy. As a young adult, probably in my early 20s, I read The Road Less Travelled by Scott Peck. I don't know whether you've ever read it, but it was like I felt understood, really understood. I read that book and I went, that's me. And really, for all of my life, I would say that I have chosen to take the road less travelled because for me that led to more interesting things happening in my life. So I've lived on 3 continents, lived and worked on 3 different continents. I have travelled my whole adult life. I've been to at least 35 different countries, and many of them multiple times over. And I've moved house a lot of times and that kind of thing, those sort of things that go with it. So, I am a planner. That J side of my personality comes out. I always have, and since my 20s, I've had a 10-year plan, a 5-year plan, a 1-year plan. Gets updated once a year. but I'm not a really, really strong J where I have to follow it then to the letter of what was in that. It's more that it gives me like a roadmap, and then I put it away and I just do whatever I feel.
Then you live
but
your
it
life.
does still live my life, but it guides me anyway. And I find that typically if I go back to my plan that I wrote 10 years ago, I will have done the things that were in that plan.
Yes.
It's just that how I got there can be a bit unconventional, which is classic of an INFJ.
Yes.
So the what I found in my career was that I always tested, as I said earlier, as an INTJ. And I think that's because in the corporate world, there's a strong leaning towards left brain rational thinking. And even though I was in a feeling profession, to get promoted and to achieve, I guess, what I felt I could achieve, I had to really engage with that thinking side. I had to be rational, clear-minded, not just go from the heart. If I wanted to, most of my fellow executives were men. If I wanted to engage in rational discussion with them, they weren't so interested in hearing the feeling arguments. They were interested in hearing the thinking arguments. So I really, really lent into that side. And, you know, I had a fantastic career, and it culminated in me being a global head of human resources. So I was doing exactly what I love, traveling the world, doing what I love. But once I left that role and I started my own business, then I started testing as an INFJ, where my authentic feeling side started coming out. And typical of INFJs, which, by the way, starting your own business is one thing that's very common for INFJs, but also I do multiple things, different things within my business. And that also is very appealing for an INFJ. Love variety, love testing yourself out. You know, everything I've always done has stretched me. It's been a hallmark. But one of the things that I do, which I really, really love doing, is I'm an executive coach. And that's probably at the heart of my INFJ profile to be doing that.
So when you were actually in business and working in that business world and working in your T mode, did you ever feel that it wasn't quite right for you? Or did you adjust to it quite well? Because sometimes if you're working in your preference that isn't you, there's a certain level of stress that sits there for a lot of the time in that role. Or did it feel quite comfortable going through with that?
It felt really comfortable, but I think that's because I was working in an F field.
Right.
So I was fulfilling working in human resources, which is a really, people-centric thing to do. I was always in that space to achieve the best that I could for people, but I was doing it in a rational thinking world. And I found that transition, I didn't find that a strain, because what I always did was, in my own head, inside me, I was striving to fulfill the need to help people. I just had to do it in a really rational. My arguments for getting funding for projects had to be highly rational. I had to be able to point to the outcome that the business would achieve by investing in a leadership program, that kind of thing. So
absolutely,
I actually enjoyed working in the T space, but it is interesting to me that the minute that I left the corporate career, I reverted to my F, which is the true and most dominant part of my personality.
Yeah, and that is really interesting because, like we say, often people will say that they test a personality and they change later. And I say to them, look, intrinsically, you are who you are from birth in that sense of preferences, and therefore that you probably have been acting in a certain role or doing things a different way. And it's great for you that it was so close, that you were able to have such a wonderful career and still feel really great about everything that you did. Now, one of the things I just want to mention is that I can remember being 21 and going to see you off at the airport to go to America. I was so scared for you because this is not me in any form or any way. There's no way I want to go overseas and try anything new or start a new life. I was very comfortable, which I am in my own environment and hometown and all the rest of it. And I just remember being in total awe of the fact that you could go off and do these things. And I've spent, the last, 40 years watching you do amazing, amazing things. So now that you're actually doing your own thing and in your business, what kind of things are you doing in your business at the moment?
Okay, so I work in the wellbeing space with leaders.
Yeah.
I renovate houses, so it's completely different. I'm also a Reiki master, which is completely different again, and I'm an executive coach. So
Phew.
they are quite diverse things. And I have to admit that until I redid my profile and I saw that it's very typical for an INFJ to want to do a whole lot of different things, that I felt like I was supposed to decide which of those I really wanted to do. And then when I saw that that's typical of my profile, it really helped to validate the fact that I could do all of them, and that's fine too. So yeah.
And it felt okay, because sometimes that's another thing that I say to people is that doing your profile actually does often validate so many things. And a lot of ENFPs that I talk to feel so unvalidated because they always feel like they're floating in and out of life, and everybody's judging the decisions that they make and how they can never kind of finish things on time. And when they see their profiles, they're just so happy and validated, because they've been, kicking themselves for years about not being the right person and all the rest of it. So often doing this kind of work and just understanding your profile, it doesn't box you in. It actually frees you up to realize, like you have, that it's okay. This is all right.
100%, Kate. Absolutely. It's one of the great things about doing your profile is that it validates who you are. It makes it okay to be you.
And it stops that worry that so many people have today about negative thoughts, about what you're doing and whether you're in the right place or how you're dealing with people. I think that if you can get a great handle on yourself, then you don't have to have negative thoughts, because you are who you are, you're unique. And once you accept that, I think life just can look so much better. So in your coaching, got any examples about the coaching and the things that you deal with while you're coaching your clients?
Yeah, so the coaching that I do is executive coaching. So I work with CEOs, board directors, and the top level executives who report to CEOs. That's my client base. And the reason that that's my client base is that, first of all, I used to do that in my corporate career. It was part of my job to coach the regional and global executives, and I really enjoyed it. I found that bringing together my business knowledge, my business strengths, and my business strengths probably lie in the N and the J.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that I can intuitively judge what's going on so that I can make leaps, I can make connections, that helped me with the coaching. And then just the coaching skills that you build up over time in your career. So I loved doing that. And when I left the corporate environment, I actually asked people. I went to people whose opinion I respected, who knew me well, and I said, what do you think I would do if I go out into my own business? And the most common answer was, oh, you'll probably coach. And I thought, well, that's good, because that's what I want to do.
Excellent.
So
always good to have the answer that you want.
Absolutely. So my clients are all executives, CEOs, board directors. They face really unrelenting challenges. You have to love what you're doing when you work in those jobs, because it requires so much from you. And what I love is I love the complexity of their world. I love the fact that their problems are so challenging, and that I can bring my corporate knowledge, and I can also bring my coaching skills and my insights and my ability to help them to grow. And then I can sit back and watch them grow. So that's why I do it. So with executive coaching, and in fact probably with any coaching actually, is that it's a very giving thing to do, because it's not about you. Coaching is so not about you. It is 100% about them. It's not an ego-free job. I have an ego. I absolutely know that. But it is a job where their growth and their success is where you get your satisfaction. Not you solving their problems, not you giving them the answers, but you helping them on their journey of self-discovery to become better and stronger leaders. So, for example, I had a client last year who's a chairman of the board, and a really good chairman of the board, delivering really good results for the business, who came under attack from a major shareholder. And when I say under attack, it was very personal and it was very strident. And this person is a very, very diligent, I think ISTJ, so introverted, sensate, thinker, judger. Very calm, very rational, very fact-based individual. So coming under a personal attack like that was very destabilising for them and also potentially destabilising for the business. So when we started coaching around this situation that they found themselves in, it was really my job in that circumstance to help them to find their equilibrium, to maintain their equilibrium, not to engage in the emotive stuff that was going on, and to play into their strengths, which is to be calm, rational, and work the problem. And once they'd stabilised and they'd found their equilibrium again, that's exactly what they did. They worked through it methodically, as they do. They were successful in defending their position, and the company remained stable. And so that was satisfying in itself to help them with that. But we met a week ago to discuss a completely different challenge that they find themselves facing. And it was really satisfying for me that in talking through that situation, they were referring back to what they'd been through last year and were drawing lessons from it. And I went, that's where the gold lies for me. That's where the real satisfaction is for me, is that they've grown as a leader.
Yeah, and they're using the knowledge that they have and the learnings that they've got from you to go forward with that leadership.
Exactly, and that's very satisfying.
It is. It is really satisfying. As a coach, it's always, like you say, gold. Now, how do you coach, and what tips do you have on how to have constructive coaching conversations?
I have certain golden rules in coaching. There's kind of 4 of them, and then there's a what not to do, so maybe it's 5.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So the first is that I always meet my clients where they are. And what I mean by that is that before you can start a coaching discussion, you need to know where their head is, how they're feeling. So, for example, let's say I'm coaching a CEO and they have said, we've agreed that we're going to have the next coaching session around the completion of their strategic plan, which for one reason or another maybe has been falling a bit behind. So we've agreed we're going to workshop that. We're going to figure out what they need to do to get it finished and maybe what obstacles are preventing that from happening. I would never open that coaching session with, okay, what we agreed last time is we're going to talk about your strategic plan, because I don't know where they are. So the first thing I'll always do, and this is what I would say for parents of children, or if you want to engage your partner, find out where they are first. So I will always say, how are you today, Kate? Or, Kate, what's been happening in your world since the last time we spoke? Or some open question like that, which is a feeling-based question. And then depending on how you answer that question, then I know how we can proceed. So let's say you say, oh, all good, nothing much has been happening. Then I'm like, okay, so Kate, last time we spoke, we agreed we would do this in this session. Are we okay to proceed with that? But if you came into the session saying, oh, I've just come from a meeting with my chairman of the board and they've just hit me with this huge project and we're never going to be able to get it done, and you're in a heightened emotional state, then I know that you and I need to talk about that before I've got any hope of directing your energy to the strategic plan topic, and maybe we'll never even get to that in this coaching session. So let's say, for example, as a parent, you want to have a chat with your teenage daughter because she constantly leaves her homework to the last minute, and that creates a drama for you as well as for them, and you really feel like it needs to be addressed. When she comes home from school, if you jump straight at her and say, we need to talk about your homework.
Which you tend to do as a
parent. You
parent.
don't know which you tend to do because you get frustrated and you're ready to have the discussion. You're ready. It's your agenda. You're ready to have your discussion about your agenda. Instead, if you say to her, how was school today, honey? You know, what's been happening for you? And she says, yeah, it was good, you know, whatever your typical teenage response, one word. Okay, so introduce the homework topic. But if she says, oh, you know, my best friend has been mean to me today and blah, 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 or they've got, you know, a gripe against a teacher, you need to process that first. If they're in a raised emotional state, you need to process that before they can do rational thinking about a homework problem. So that's my first tip, is always meet them where they are.
Cool.
Kind of.
Yep, I agree with you totally.
Second thing is that the most important thing when it comes to coaching is listening. It is the most, if you're not listening, you cannot coach. So you have to listen 100%. You have to be fully present. You need to engage not just your hearing, but all of your senses. So really, really listen to the person with every fibre of your being. So watch them. What's happening to their... Listen for the feeling behind the words that they're using. You would know, Kate, that something like 90, I think it's more than 90% of human communication is nonverbal. So you've got to be watching and listening for everything that's going on for them. Hear what's happening in their voice. Are they angry? Are they hurt? Are they ashamed? Are they frustrated? Try to identify the emotion that sits behind whatever's going on for them. So it's that really, really listening. That's number 2. So first, meet them where they are. Number 2 is listen, really listen. Then the number 3 that follows the listening, and it's only once they've finished talking that you then ask questions. And the questions aren't just, they're to really clarify. What happens a lot in verbal communication is that we actually misunderstand or we make assumptions based on our understanding of the situation or our knowledge of the person. Where if you ask clarifying questions, it can really help to unveil what's really going on for them, or it can help them to understand better what's going on for them. It leads you closer to them coming up with their own insights into what's happening for them, and also therefore to come up with their own answers. And them coming up with their own answers is always going to be more helpful than you coming up with the answers for them. So like an example of that, just really briefly, would be my son, who is he's an ENFP, but he's quite a low-key E. He's quite self-contained. But that intuitive feeler perceiver just means there's a lot going on inside them, and
absolutely
a lot. Well, when he finished high school, he decided to go and get himself a job, and he got a job as a landscape gardener, which I was really proud of him going and finding that. It was during COVID and hard to find jobs, and he was proud of himself. And I love gardening, so I was rapt that he was going to be a gardener. I thought, yay. And then he started indicating as the months went by that he wasn't really enjoying his work. But here is what happened for me with all my skills, is I assumed that what was going on for him is that he was still making the transition from being a child in high school to living the realities of the adult world, getting out of bed every day, going into a job, no matter what the conditions, no matter how you're feeling. But I was wrong. After a certain amount of time, it was nearly a year, he really indicated to me that he was utterly miserable in his job. So finally, I was fully present and engaged my curiosity and started asking questions. And once I did that, we uncovered that he was really not suited for the work that he was doing. So we did some personality profiling, we did character strengths, and it became obvious to him through that he needs to do work in a team, and he needs to do work that's helping people. So he went and found himself a new job, which is as a disability care worker, and now he goes to work every day loving what he does, energized by what he does, because he's helping people and he's working with a whole team of like-minded people. So that's the value. I wonder how many months earlier I could have helped him if I hadn't been operating out of my assumption instead of stopping and asking clarifying questions. So number 1, meet them where they are. Number 2, really listen. And number 3, be present and ask questions. Then the 4th thing is, and this is kind of one of these things that I don't have to use in every coaching session, but it can be really helpful, which is to paraphrase. So to say back to the person what you hear them saying to you. Sometimes I do that because I literally want to clarify that I've heard them correctly,
yes.
especially if they've been really rambling or long-winded in what they've been saying. Sometimes I do it because it will help them to reject or accept that they hear what they were saying. But it's not for every occasion. So, for example, let's say your partner came home and had a rant about something, and you've done the right thing. You've stopped what you're doing. You've fully engaged with them. You've shown them that you care by making eye contact and by really listening. You've asked them some questions to clarify so that you don't assume that their rant is just a rant. And then you hear them, for example, saying some things where you're thinking, I don't think that's going to work. If you replay it to them, you don't say,
yes.
Oh, I don't think that's going to work.
No.
You replay to them. So what I hear you saying is blah, 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 blah. Is that right, Kate? Is that what you're meaning to say? And when you hear it back, you'll either go, yes, that's exactly what I mean. Then you can ask a question, what do you think might be the unintended consequences of that? For example, you can ask follow-up questions, but that paraphrasing can be really helpful.
Yes, I totally understand that. So what's your fifth and final rule about what not to do?
What not to do is no matter how much you are tempted, no matter how much you have the experience, the wisdom and the knowledge, do not give them the answer. Don't give them advice. Don't jump in and solve their problem for them. Don't tell them what to do. And don't try to persuade them and cajole them to your way of doing things. Because that's just a recipe for frustration and disappointment for both of you. When you're coaching, and this is about coaching, when you're coaching, it is listen, ask questions, paraphrase. Your job is to help them solve the problem themselves. So that's my final piece of advice. Don't solve the problem for them.
That is amazing. So, Trace, tell me, in reality, we talk about coaching and we talk about advice. What's your perception of the reality of life around coaching and advice?
Yeah. So I think, Kate, that there are, and I know this from my own experience, is that there are times when coaching is exactly the right thing to do. But there are times when advice is the right thing to give. And there are times when a person just wants to vent. They're not actually trying to solve the problem at all. They're not ready to solve the problem. They just need someone to vent with. So I know that sometimes my friends can try to vent with me and I switch into coaching mode and I think it's very annoying for them.
Yes.
So I try not to do it. When I'm in a coaching relationship with my clients, it's very simple because they engage me to coach and I coach. In your personal life, like for example, recently I rang you and I said, Kate, I need to vent and I need your advice. I don't need coaching. So because I understand the difference between them, I knew exactly what I needed from you. You were very wise. You cut to the chase. You gave me great advice. I went away. I did it and it worked perfectly.
Which is fantastic.
I think.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think that when it comes to distinguishing in messy old life does my child, does my husband, does my wife need advice, coaching, or are they just venting? If you're not sure what it is that's required of you, what you say, Kate, is I think the best way to approach it, which is to actually ask them, do you need my advice or do you just need me to listen? And once they answer that question, you just take it from there.
Tracy, everything that you've said today is absolute gold. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your personality journey, your amazing insights and incredible knowledge about not only yourself, but the people that you work with and play with. And I'm sure that much of your conversation today is going to be life-changing for many of the people listening. So thank you again so much for coming in. It's been wonderful to have you.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks for asking me.
So as we can see, everyone brings to the table the wonderful montage of their life experiences. Listen and learn, and maybe you'll find out something new. I'm Kate Mason. Thank you for listening to Personalities, Parenting and Partners. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you could leave a rating and a review that would help others learn about this podcast. If you have an episode idea, please send a note to thepersonalitycoach@gmail.com. Many thanks to our producers at Podcasts at Pop, would you do us a favour and recommend this podcast to one friend? Thanks, and we'll see you next time.